quiet heart of Amstetten, Austria, a place where neighbors waved from garden fences and children rode bicycles down sunlit streets, a house stood that looked no different from the rest. Pale yellow walls, tidy windows, flowers blooming by the door, but beneath that picture of peace, beneath layers of concrete and politeness, something monstrous was growing. No one could have imagined that behind Josef Fritzl's calm smile, behind his precise gestures and quiet discipline, was a darkness so deep it would one day make the world tremble. To the people around him, Josef was respectable, a skilled engineer, a devoted husband, a father of 7. He was the man who fixed things in the neighborhood, the man who paid his bills on time, who nodded politely when you said hello. But evil, real evil, rarely announces itself. It hides, it mimics normality and waits. In the late 1970s, when most families in Amstetten were enjoying post-war peace and growing prosperity, Josef began a private project beneath his home. He told everyone he was expanding the basement, adding storage space, maybe building a shelter, just in case. The Cold War was still on. People talked about safety, about preparation. So, no one questioned him. He worked alone, often late into the night, carrying bricks and cement down narrow stairs, sealing doors, reinforcing walls. What he built wasn't a cellar. It was a tomb. He designed it with an engineer's precision, thick concrete walls, a hidden entrance behind a shelf, doors that could only open from one side. There was no natural light, no air circulation except for a small vent disguised behind pipes. To anyone else it would look absurd, but Josef knew exactly what he was preparing for. Years later, when he would be asked why, he said, "Because I could." By 1984, the Fritzl family seemed perfectly ordinary. Josef's wife, Rosemarie, ran the house with strict order. Their youngest daughter, Elisabeth, had just turned 18, bright, soft-spoken, a little shy. She dreamed of becoming a waitress, maybe traveling one day. She had friends, plans, and a gentle kindness that made people like her instantly. But to Josef, she was not a daughter. She was an object of control, someone to own, to dominate, to erase from the world above. On the morning of the 28th of August 1984, Elisabeth vanished. She told her mother she'd be visiting a friend. She never came back. When the sun set and Elisabeth didn't return, Rosemarie began to worry. By nightfall, she was calling the police. Posters went up, descriptions were broadcast on local radio. 18 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing jeans and a white sweater. Days passed, no sign. Then, a week later, a letter arrived. It was written in Elisabeth's handwriting, shaky but convincing. She said she was fine, that she'd run away to join a religious cult. She begged her parents not to look for her, saying she was happy and free. The letter was postmarked from a nearby town. Police believed it. Josef handed it to them with trembling hands, pretending to be broken with grief. He told them he hoped she'd return someday, that he'd forgive her, and they pitied him, the poor, heartbroken father. But the letter was fake. Josef had made her write it. Beneath the house, in the small chamber he had built, Elisabeth was already trapped. When she followed him down the stairs that morning, she thought he needed help carrying something heavy. She had no reason to fear him. He was her father. But when she reached the end of the narrow hallway, he swung a steel door shut behind her. The sound of that lock would echo in her mind for decades. The room was smaller than she'd imagined. Bare concrete walls, a single bed, a sink. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of fresh cement. There was no window, no way out. When she screamed, the walls swallowed her voice. Josef told her it was temporary. Just a few days, he said. She had misbehaved, and he needed to teach her a lesson. She cried, begged, promised to be good. But days turned to weeks, and the door stayed closed. Rosemarie, upstairs, cooked dinner as usual. She set 7 plates instead of 8. She cried sometimes, but Josef would hold her hand and say softly, "She'll come back when she's ready." And somehow, she believed him. Below, Elisabeth learned the meaning of silence. Josef came down almost every night. He brought food, blankets, sometimes books, and soon his visits became something darker. She would later say that in those early days, she still believed she might escape. But after the first assault, she stopped hoping. He was methodical, cold, detached. He treated the cellar like a laboratory, his daughter like an experiment in obedience. Each time he descended the stairs, she could hear his footsteps, 12 slow creaks, and her body would freeze. Above ground, life went on. Neighbors laughed, cars passed, birds sang. Below, time dissolved. The first year became the second became 5. By then, Elisabeth no longer marked days. She spoke to the walls. She slept whenever the light bulb flickered out. She began to forget what rain sounded like. Josef's cruelty grew in tandem with his control. He installed extra locks, extended the room, added a small bathroom, not out of kindness, but necessity. He needed her alive. He needed his secret intact. He was meticulous about everything. He burned her clothes, destroyed her belongings, told his family lies about where he'd seen her. Sometimes, he would return upstairs and eat dinner, while the muffled hum of her cries echoed through the floor beneath him. To outsiders, he was just an aging father mourning his lost daughter. But beneath, he had become something else, a god in his own underworld, ruling over fear and silence. Years blurred. Then one night, Elisabeth felt the first pain of childbirth. The air in the cellar was heavy, thick like a living thing. It pressed against Elisabeth's lungs, against her thoughts, against every dream she once had. Down there, seasons didn't exist. There was only one endless night, broken by the hum of fluorescent light and the sound of her father's footsteps above. When she first realized she was pregnant, she didn't believe it. The human mind, when faced with horror, tries to deny. But as the weeks passed, the truth grew inside her, silent, unstoppable. She cried for days. She didn't want to bring a life into this dungeon, but she had no choice. In the summer of 1988, her first child was born. Josef delivered the baby himself. He brought towels, scissors, blankets, and watched as Elisabeth screamed in agony on the concrete floor. No hospital, no doctor, no light. Just the sound of her own heartbeat echoing off the walls. When the child finally came, she held him close, whispering promises she couldn't keep. The baby cried, the first real sound in that tomb. For a moment, she thought maybe that cry could pierce the ceiling, reach the world above. It didn't. Josef looked down at them, emotionless. He told her to be quiet, then left. The heavy door shut, and the silence returned. Days turned into months. The baby grew pale, fragile, coughing in the damp air. Elisabeth named him Michael, but Michael didn't survive. The air was too heavy, the room too cold. She held him until his body went still. When she begged Josef to help, he took the baby's body and disappeared. Later, she would learn what he did. He burned the remains in the furnace upstairs. He told her it was her fault. The cruelty wasn't just physical, it was psychological, systematic. Josef played God, creating rules and punishments that made no sense. He rationed food, shut off lights for days, manipulated every ounce of hope she had left. Yet somehow, Elisabeth survived. She clung to small rituals, counting cracks in the wall, humming songs she remembered from childhood, imagining the color of the sky. And then more children came. 6 more over the years. Some nights Josef would come down with baby clothes or toys, pretending to be helpful. Other nights, he came with nothing but his anger. Elisabeth learned to read his footsteps, whether they were calm or sharp, whether she'd be hurt or ignored. The cellar evolved. He built extensions, small rooms, a kitchen, a tiny bathroom. He installed a ventilation system and an electric stove. On the surface, it might seem like he was improving her life. In reality, he was building a kingdom where he alone ruled. 3 of the children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, were taken upstairs. Josef claimed that Elisabeth had left them on the doorstep, unable to care for them. Rosemary believed him. She raised them as her own, decorating their birthdays, sending them to school, never suspecting that their real mother was imprisoned below. The other 3, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, remained underground with Elisabeth. They grew up in darkness, never seeing the sky. They didn't know what the sun was. When they asked about the noises above, Elisabeth told them stories that angels walked up there, that someday they'd see them too. She made toys out of scraps, She taught them to read from old magazines. She drew trees on the walls so they'd know what green looked like. Every sound from the world above was sacred footsteps, laughter, the distant chime of a church bell. Sometimes when Josef left the door open for a second too long, they'd breathe in a faint gust of air from the outside, and it felt like a miracle. Elisabeth became more than a prisoner. She became a mother, a teacher, a protector in a world without light. Her children only knew her voice, her warmth, and the four walls that contained their lives. Meanwhile, Josef lived two lives. Upstairs, he was the devoted father, the handyman, the good citizen. He went on vacations with Rosemary, smiled for photos, attended neighborhood barbecues. Downstairs, he was the architect of hell. He kept everything secret with surgical precision. He paid cash for every renovation. He never let electricians near the cellar. He forged letters from Elisabeth to her mother, even after 2 decades, pretending she was still alive somewhere far away. No one questioned him. Why would they? He was ordinary, respectable. That was his mask, and it fit perfectly. Inside the cellar, time stretched and twisted. Christmases came and went. Elisabeth would whisper carols to her children while upstairs, the family sang the same songs, not knowing they echoed through the floorboards. When the electricity failed, they sat in darkness for hours. Sometimes Josef forgot to bring food. Sometimes he shut the power off on purpose, to remind them who controlled their lives. The youngest, Felix, was terrified of the sound of locks. Each time the steel door clanged, he would cover his ears and hide under the bed. Stefan, the oldest boy underground, tried to be brave, but he was already too aware. At age 12, he told his mother, "If we ever get out, I want to live near the Sunday." But years kept passing, and escape felt impossible. By 2008, Elisabeth had been imprisoned for 24 years. Her hair had turned gray, her skin pale as chalk. The children had grown into young adults who'd never seen daylight. They didn't even know what year it was anymore. Then came the day that would change everything. Kirsten, her eldest underground daughter, began to feel sick. At first it was a fever. Then, her body started to shut down. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. Elisabeth panicked. She begged Josef for help, saying the girl would die if they didn't take her to a doctor. He refused for days. He didn't want to risk discovery, but when Kirsten began convulsing, he finally agreed. He carried her up the stairs, her first time ever seeing the ceiling of the real world, and left her at the hospital doorstep with a forged note. "My name is Kirsten. My mother left me. Please help me." Doctors were confused. The girl's condition made no sense. Her skin was paper white, her teeth decaying, her eyes unable to handle light. Her blood work showed extreme vitamin deficiency, the kind only seen in people kept from sunlight for years. They called the police. The story Josef told them about Elisabeth joining a cult didn't match what they were seeing. Something was wrong. Within days, the quiet town of Amstetten would become the center of one of the darkest investigations in human history. And for the first time in 24 years, the door to the cellar would open. When the truth finally surfaced in 2008, the small town of Amstetten changed forever. Reporters filled the narrow streets, flashing cameras outside a quiet, gray house that had once looked so ordinary. People whispered in disbelief they had lived next door to a man capable of creating his own private world of horror. The basement, once sealed tight, now stood open for the world to see, but no one could bear to look for long. Inside, investigators described a silence that felt alive. Every wall carried the weight of secrets, marks on the concrete, tiny notes left behind, an old mattress that seemed to hold echoes of pain and survival. There was no sunlight, no sound of birds, just the low hum of the air system that had kept them breathing. It wasn't a home, it was a tomb built for the living. As the police pieced together the timeline, every discovery became more chilling. Neighbors remembered Josef as polite, even helpful. He fixed their lights, lent tools, smiled when he walked his dog. No one could have guessed what he was hiding beneath that calm expression. The perfect mask. The perfect illusion. For days, the nation could talk about nothing else. TV anchors called it the house beneath the silence. Psychologists were brought in to study what kind of mind could build something like this. a place designed not just to trap bodies, but to control souls. Some said it was about power. Others said it was about fear, a man terrified of losing control over the world he had built. Elisabeth and her children were moved to a secure clinic, far away from the cameras. Doctors said they had lived in total isolation for so long that even sunlight could hurt their eyes. When they saw the sky for the first time, some of the children thought it was painted too bright, too unreal. Elisabeth didn't speak much, but when she did, her words were quiet, steady. She said she didn't want revenge. She just wanted silence, but the kind that brings peace, not fear. Josef was arrested without resistance. In court, he sat calm, expressionless. As the charges were read out, years of imprisonment, cruelty, coercion. The room was cold. The world watched as he listened to his own story being told back to him, stripped of his control, his lies, his power. For the first time, he was the one trapped. In 2009, he was sentenced to life behind bars. He never showed regret. Reporters said he seemed more angry about losing control than about what he'd done. He told the court he loved his family and that what happened was just a mistake. But the world knew this wasn't love. It was possession, obsession, a darkness that had taken human form. Years passed. Elisabeth changed her name and disappeared from the public eye. Her children went through therapy, learning slowly how to live under the open sky. One of the doctors said, "They will never forget, but they will learn that the world is bigger than that cellar." And she was right. By 2024, 15 years had gone by since the case shocked the world. The house in Amstetten was sealed off, its windows boarded, its yard overgrown. Nature was slowly taking it back, vines creeping up the walls, covering the doorway that once led down to darkness. Locals avoided the street at night. They said sometimes, when the wind blew just right, you could still hear the faint hum of the generator below. Maybe it was just a story. Or maybe some houses never really go quiet. Elisabeth's story became a symbol not just of cruelty, but of survival. She lived through something no one should ever face, and yet she refused to let it define her. Somewhere out there, she lives a quiet life with her children, under real sunlight, behind doors that lock from the inside, not the outside. And as for that basement, it stands as a monument to what happens when evil hides in plain sight. Because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't found in nightmares. They live among us, smiling, waving, blending into the ordinary. And no one sees them until it's far too late.